For those who wish to create content, to give advice, to talk about anything in a people area, you might hear from certain people, who are you to give advice? Look at your own life. You're not perfect. You got so many problems. Get your act together before you start talking about life and giving advice, for goodness sake. You might hear that from certain people. One might especially hear it from a family member or from your community, especially if they've known you a considerably long period of time. And you know, to every criticism, there is at least a nugget of truth, a kernel, and I believe that that is to be looked at and learned from. But it's never the totality, surely. So if somebody says something to us, maybe it hurts. But I see two types of people if you were to look in general. There's the type of person who says they have flaws. Some say they have so many flaws that everything is their fault. And then there are those who say they have no flaws, and whatever suffering they have, especially emotionally, is always someone else's fault. You might call that finger pointing, or blame shifting all the time. In fact, Eric Berne, a psychoanalyst from the 1950s onward, had written a book, I'm Okay, You're Okay. And I skimmed through that very quickly one day and saw this topic, amongst others, discussed a little bit. Two mindsets there. Now, I noticed a couple years ago, reading on the topic of personality disorders, for what it's worth, that it was mentioned there's a lack of awareness concerning the issue at hand, whatever personality disorder was being talked of as per that terminology. But it strikes me that if you took it another level up, what we're talking about here is not just a lack of awareness about that flaw, that area, but a general overall claim that they have no flaws, unless they're going to say the only flaws they have are genetic in nature, and thus it's not really a personality flaw. It's not a flaw in terms of your core premises, your thinking, your data in your head, that it's all just genetic if you have any flaws. Or the flaw might even be turned into a virtue, like saying that your perfectionism or what have you is actually a virtue because you're relabeling it great attention to detail. So if a person is saying they have no flaws, then I think it also follows that they would give content, provide advice, give stories from their life that is said to be all you need to know how to best live life happily. And second, that you're completely certain of it without a doubt. Now, it's said in one video on Tony Robbins' change from janitor to millionaire in 18 months that he was able to sign on Microsoft executives as clients during that period of time by conveying super confidence. There's also a book. I have the audiobook version, Get to the Point. And the author urges people to be super confident in order to sell your message. Yet others urge us not to show any flaws, lest we be considered incompetent. Why? I suppose because we're supposed to have all the answers. And if you show a flaw, then people might think that they can't download the totality of how to live life best in 10 minutes or less. Kind of like waving a magic wand and having things cured in 1 hour, say, like a self-help book purports to do. Thus, losing some clients who are unwilling, unable to build something brick by brick, but want it prefab, delivered with a crane, and assembled by a crew in 24 hours or less. As opposed to a home taking, say, 6 months, or who knows how long for the castles, say, in Europe, Neuschwanstein and Hohenschwangau, which took decades perhaps, or longer to build. Not 24 hours, and certainly not with the quickness of a pill. So isn't that then what a guru is? Or one of these leaders like Jimmy Jones in South America, or a group like Heaven's Gate? They all purport as cults to tell you how best to live life, and in very neat packages that you just download with no thinking required. But of course you must not question anything. That's called dogma, isn't it? Or in certain terms, at certain times, demagoguery. And especially when a nation is at a crisis point, they want instant solutions. They don't want to have to think, build anything brick by brick. They want it delivered by FedEx or emplaced with a crane as per building a prefab house. They want it quickly, don't we? Under stress. The last thing we want to do is build something that takes time, and under stress you can't think clearly anyway, or remember things very well, or attend to anything. We want to bounce around and escape our thoughts and our pains in general. Hence, again, the concept of two types of people in a broad sense. Those who are providing content by conveying utter certainty and no flaws within oneself, especially to the large number of people who want something overnight. The self-help book group, who buys, by the way, books by the dozens over each year, reads 5 minutes of them and puts them in the slush pile of I'll get back to it someday again, knowing that the book really isn't very helpful, and yet so distraught, so panicky that they go the next week and buy another one and yet another. I think sadly then when we're criticized by somebody, we need to take stock and say, is there legitimacy to them claiming that we need to get our act together in this sense again? Are we claiming to have it all together, and this conveyed in our nonverbal communications of utter certainty? Or are we conveying we have doubts, as per Voltaire, talking about this issue, and some others? If we want to see someone, for instance, who has doubts and expresses them, I like the man Nada, N-A-D-A, on the Awaken Insight channel, A-W-A-K-E-E-N, who talks quite a bit of how he has uncertainties. I'd finally put out that there are videos on this topic of uncertainty and being overconfident, and on what we consider facts, and how some say there is no such thing as a fact, only a theory or hypothesis. Hence, some of the greatest scientists and minds, take it for what you will, errors or not, such as Darwin and Einstein, talk of things like the theory of relativity, or theories on time. Was that Hawking? The theory of Darwin, what was the name of that theory? But at any rate, the theory of evolution. All talking of things, theories as per not being certain. I'm reminded finally of Spock, Leonard Nimoy, in one movie. And he was talking with his mother, was it on the planet of Vulcan? And she was saying to him, if I remember, that his guesses were better than most people's facts, as they thought of it. Hence, Spock being uncertain, if I remember. But that uncertainty can be a virtue to convey, I believe, in a world where everybody tends, relatively speaking, to want to claim certainty to sway others. This, by the way, covered wonderfully by a man named Trivers. Is it Dr. Trivers? He might have a book, if I remember the title, The Folly of Fools, amongst others, and quite a number of videos out on this whole topic of how one of the best ways to convince other people of your ideas is to first convince yourself of their being positively correct in every aspect. Self-deception before deceiving others. Interesting topic here. So once again, to recap finally, if we're told that we're foolish or more to be saying anything when we don't have our act together, well, have we conveyed that we have our act together with 100% certainty or not? Or are we conveying we have some doubts and also showing some flaws? Isn't that called being vulnerable? And yes, if some people don't want to buy or listen to your products or ideas because they want a 10-second download of how to live life, a blueprint without error, isn't that then why people bounce from one religion to another, or one denomination to another, or one church to another, or one talk show host to another, etc.? When we find out the guru has flaws, we want to move to the next guru. If we have that mindset of wanting everything prefab, digestible in 10 seconds or less, like baby food, instead of it having to sit in your stomach for a few hours, relatively speaking, or wanting the magic pill approach, pills tending to take effect quite quickly. Even the sleeping pill approach, wanting to sleep with a pill instead of getting to the underlying reasons for why we can't sleep so well, if that is a problem for us. So yes, if we convey that we are not certain and convey details about flaws we have in our life, some will tune right out. They'll say either that we're a fraud or that our stuff is useless like everybody else's. I was once told, for instance, by a man a couple of years ago, what makes you think you're any different than the 999 other course providers out there? Well, I suppose some would also say that any source of knowledge is fraudulent. Well, then how are you going to grow other than sitting in a room and reinventing everything, including calculus for that matter? For if you read a calculus book, it has flaws too, but you don't chuck it out because you can't digest it in 10 seconds or less, claiming that the author is fraudulent because it's not polished enough for easy and quick digestion. I'd finish this up with one last comment, that some people might say that so-and-so is not only fraudulent because they have inaccuracies that were covered up by claims of positive certainty to 100% level, but they might feel tweaked and claim that the person is arrogant. Maybe that goes hand in hand. To claim that you are 100% certain is to be arrogant in a derogatory term sense. But then what's the problem with that? Unless we want to believe that we're perfect and someone else is claiming to be perfect, and that bothers us. Maybe we need to learn, some of us, that we can learn from people that we get tweaked by, who claim they're perfect and we're calling arrogant for. Otherwise, how can we learn from anybody if we want them to be perfect? Once again, so either our ego isn't hurt or we can get a quick download. And everything's fixed peachy keen in 10 seconds or less, or as per how long it takes to either scan or read completely a self-help book. And one last thought from my own life, and from observing those in my life for years, I'd say one of the biggest reasons why for so many years and decades I could not make much progress on certain key issues in my life was because I couldn't attend to the issues at hand and work through them, think them through, write upon them, work incrementally on things. If we have certain ways of escaping also that are socially acceptable, that doesn't help matters any. So, for instance, a couple bigaboos here. If we have chronic anger, and sometimes it morphing into rage, that's going to really stop us dead in our tracks, I believe, from growing, from attending. We're going to constantly be fleeing those thoughts, or they will lock us in frozen rage. Or secondly, what about massive fears, which I would call catastrophizings? They can also send us spinning so much that we are in a constant state of escapism, or these dominate us from working on our problems, once again, because they overwhelm us. They overwhelm also access to what you might call tender feelings. And the more we nuke them with, quote, medications, tranquilizers of 10 billion types, in my mind, that destroys access to our feelings. Perhaps the rage, the anger, the fears dulls it so much that we have so little to question. So they also dull thinking sometimes of any sort, I believe, such that one simply stares at the floor, either literally or figuratively. One's kind of zoned out. Thus are my thoughts for to consider.